I worked at Gilroy's for 3 months the summer I turned 22. I want to be clear about that from the start. 3 months, not a year, not some long career. 91 days, give or take. And what I need to tell you about happened mostly in the last 30 of those days, though I think the groundwork was being laid from the moment I put on that visor. Gilroy's was a burger chain. Regional. You've probably never heard of it unless you grew up in the Central Valley of California or parts of western Nevada. They had maybe 40 locations, all of them built in this very specific style. Orange and brown tile, pitched roof with a cupola, big plate glass windows facing the parking lot. The branding hadn't changed since the 80s. The logo was a cartoon cow holding a spatula, wearing a chef's hat, and if that sounds charming, it wasn't. The cow's expression had this quality, not quite smiling, more like it had just finished smiling and was waiting to see if you'd noticed. I got the job because I needed one and because it was close to the apartment I was subletting that summer. I dropped out of a communications degree that was going nowhere and was trying to figure out what came next. And in the meantime, I needed to make rent. Gilroy's was hiring. The hours were flexible, and the interview was conducted by a woman named Patrice, who seemed genuinely relieved when I told her I could start immediately. The restaurant was on Delmore Avenue, which is one of those 4-lane commercial strips that exists in every mid-sized California town. Auto parts store, nail salon, check cashing place, Gilroy's. The parking lot was cracked and too big for the building, and there was a drainage ditch along the back edge where shopping carts from the grocery store down the block always ended up. It wasn't depressing exactly, but it had that quality of being a place you'd never choose to be if you had other options. And everyone who worked there understood that about themselves and about each other. That was the baseline. Nobody was building a career. Nobody was passionate about the Gilroy's double stack. We were all just there because we had to be somewhere. The crew was small. Patrice managed days. A guy named Victor managed nights. There were maybe 12 of us total across both shifts, and I was put on the evening crew, which ran from 4 to close. Close being midnight on weekdays and 2 in the morning on Fridays and Saturdays. My job was flexible. Sometimes register, sometimes drive-through headset, sometimes fry station. Gilroy's didn't believe in fixed positions. You rotated. They said it was to keep everyone trained on everything. But really it was because people quit constantly and they needed everyone to be able to cover for the person who just stopped showing up. The people I worked with were fine. Normal. There was Deshaun, who was saving up for community college and played music from his phone tucked into the visor of his cap. There was Megan, who was quiet and fast and never complained about anything, which made her Patrice's favorite. There was a kid named Elijah, who was 17, and mostly just stood wherever you put him and did whatever you told him, which at 17 working fast food is honestly the best strategy. And there was Andrea. Andrea had been at Gilroy's longer than anyone. When I started, she'd been there 11 months, which at a place like Gilroy's might as well have been a decade. She trained me on my first shift, and she was good at it, patient, clear, no condescension. She showed me the register system, walked me through the drive-through headset protocol, explained the fry timers and the way the grill needed to be scraped at specific intervals. Normal stuff, useful stuff. But every now and then, while she was showing me something routine, she'd add something that didn't quite fit. Like when she was showing me how to restock the napkin dispensers. She pulled one off the counter, flipped it over, showed me how the bottom panel slid out so you could feed the napkins in. And then she said very casually, "If you're restocking after 10 p.m., do the ones by the windows last. Always last." She didn't, She just moved on to the straw dispenser. Or later that same shift, when she showed me how the walk-in freezer worked. Standard stuff, heavy door, latch handle, light switch on the inside. She told me the rule about never letting the door close all the way behind you, because the interior handle stuck sometimes. Fair enough. But then she said, if you're in there and you hear the fryer alarm go off, the long one, not the short one, don't come out right away. Wait about 2 minutes. Why? It's just better. I assumed these were the kinds of superstitions that build up in any workplace. Don't sit in that chair. Don't use that parking spot. Don't microwave fish in the break room. Small rules that accrete over time, born from specific incidents that nobody fully remembers anymore. I figured Andrea had just been there long enough to absorb all of them. Andrea had been at Gilroy's longer than anyone. When I started, she'd been there 11 months, which at a place like Gilroy's might as well have been a decade. She trained me on my first shift, and she was good at it. Patient, clear, no condescension. She showed me the register system, walked me through the drive-thru headset protocol, explained the fry timers and the way the grill needed to be scraped at specific intervals. Normal stuff, useful stuff. But every now and then, while she was showing me something routine, she'd add something that didn't quite fit. Like when she was showing me how to restock the napkin dispensers. She pulled one off the counter, flipped it over, showed me how the bottom panel slid out so you could feed the napkins in. And then she said very casually, if you're restocking after 10 p.m., do the ones by the windows last. Always last. She didn't. She just moved on to the straw dispenser. Or later that same shift, when she showed me how the walk-in freezer worked. Standard stuff, heavy door, latch handle, light switch on the inside. She told me the rule about never letting the door close all the way behind you, because the interior handle stuck sometimes. Fair enough. But then she said, if you're in there and you hear the fryer alarm go off, the long one, not the short one, don't come out right away. Wait about 2 minutes. Why? It's just better. I assumed these were the kinds of superstitions that build up in any workplace. Don't sit in that chair. Don't use that parking spot. Don't microwave fish in the break room. Small rules that accrete over time, born from specific incidents that nobody fully remembers anymore. I figured Andrea had just been there long enough to absorb all of them. Gilroy's had those big plate glass windows I mentioned, the ones facing the parking lot. During the day, they let in plenty of light. At night, they became mirrors. You could see the whole interior of the restaurant reflected back at you. The orange booths, the menu boards, the counter, the crew moving around in the kitchen. And beyond the reflection, nothing. Just the dark parking lot and the occasional sweep of headlights from Delmore Avenue. What I noticed was that sometimes, if I was wiping down the dining room tables and happened to look at the windows from a certain angle, the reflection seemed wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not in any way I could point to and say, that's different. It was more like the feeling you get when you look at a photograph that's been very slightly altered. One element shifted a few pixels. One color changed by a fraction. Your eyes can't find the problem, but your brain knows it's there. I'd stop and stare at the reflection, trying to identify what was off. And every time, I'd either decide I was imagining it or get called back to the kitchen by someone who needed help, and I'd let it go. I mentioned it to Andrea once during a slow Thursday night. We were both leaning against the back counter, waiting for the next drive-thru ping, and I said something like, hey, is it just me? Or do the windows look weird at night? She looked at me. not with surprise, more like she was assessing something. Weird how? I don't know. The reflection seems off sometimes, like something's not matching up. She said it the same way she'd said the thing about the napkin dispensers. Not scared, not urgent, just flat, like she was telling me which button to press on the register. I'm serious, I said. Have you noticed it? Neither should you. And then Victor called from the back that the shake machine needed cleaning. And that was the end of it. I want to describe Victor because he matters later, and because he was a strange person in ways I didn't fully appreciate at first. Victor Reyes, mid-40s, stocky mustache. Always wore his Gilroy's polo tucked into his khakis, even though nobody else did. He'd been managing the night shift for about 3 years, which made him the longest tenured employee at our location by a wide margin. He was competent in a joyless way. He never yelled, never joked, never said anything that wasn't directly related to the operation of the restaurant. If you asked him a personal question, how was your weekend? Got any plans for the holiday? He'd answer with 1 or 2 words and redirect to something work-related. The thing about Victor was his eyes. They were attentive in a way that went beyond what the job required. When you were working, you could feel him watching you. Not in a creepy way, not in a supervisory way, more like a scientist observing a subject, noting things, cataloging. He'd stand by the office door with his clipboard and watch the crew work. And sometimes he'd make small notes, and if you asked him what he was writing, he'd say inventory or schedule and walk away. I didn't think much of Victor those first few weeks. He was just the manager, quiet, efficient, slightly odd. Every fast food place has one. It was around the start of my 3rd week that things began to shift in a way I couldn't easily dismiss. It started with the customers. Like I said, after 8 o'clock, traffic slowed way down. But the customers who came in late tended to be regulars, and you got to know their patterns. There was an older man who came in every Tuesday and Thursday around 9:15 and ordered the same thing, a single patty, plain, with a small coffee. He'd sit in the booth closest to the restrooms and eat slowly, reading a folded newspaper. There was a woman who came through the drive-thru most nights around 10, ordered a large chocolate shake and nothing else, and was always talking on her phone when she pulled up to the window. There was a group of teenagers who showed up on weekend nights, loud and harmless, who'd order 1 large fry to split among 5 people and sit in the corner booth for an hour. What I started noticing was that some of the late-night customers didn't fit any pattern. They'd come in once, order something, eat it or not eat it, and leave. That's normal. But they shared certain qualities that, once I noticed, I couldn't stop noticing. They always came in alone. They always paid with exact change. And they never quite looked at you. I don't mean they avoided eye contact in the way that shy people do, or distracted people, or people on their phones. I mean their gaze would come close to meeting yours, and then slide past, like your face was a surface their eyes couldn't find traction on. They'd look at the menu board, look at the counter, look at their wallet as they counted out exact change, and it was always exact, to the penny, which meant they'd already known the total before they ordered. And then they'd take their food and sit down, and they'd eat it in a way that was technically correct, but somehow off. Like someone who'd learned the motions of eating from a very detailed description, but had never been hungry. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that working late nights in a fluorescent-lit fast food restaurant can make you see things that aren't there. Boredom and tired eyes and the low-grade weirdness of being awake when your body thinks you should be asleep. All of that can turn ordinary people into something that feels wrong. I told myself that's what was happening. But then I started counting. Over the course of a week, during my shifts, I counted 14 of these customers. 14 people who came in alone, paid with exact change, avoided direct eye contact, and ate with that strange mechanical precision. 14 people whose faces I couldn't remember 5 minutes after they left. Not because they were forgettable in the way that some people are forgettable. More because the memory of their face seemed to resist being stored. I'd try to picture the person who'd just been sitting in booth 4, and I'd get the shape of a head, the suggestion of features, but nothing specific. Like trying to remember a face from a dream. I brought it up with Deshawn during a lull one night. I tried to keep it casual. Hey, have you noticed that some of the late night people are kind of weird? Deshawn was cleaning the shake machine and didn't look up. Everybody's weird at 11 o'clock, man. That's just Gilroy's after dark. No, I mean, have you noticed that some of them pay with exact change? Like every time? I don't really pay attention to that. I just take the money, make the change, move on. But what if there's no change to make? What if they hand you exact? Then it's faster for both of us. Why are you being weird about this? I let it drop. But I noticed that Deshawn, for the rest of that shift, didn't take a single order from the front counter. He found reasons to stay in the kitchen. Grill duty, fryer maintenance, restocking. He didn't come back to the register until I was already cashing out my drawer at the end of the night. The next thing that happened was the training video. Every fast food chain has training videos. Usually, they're terrible. Low budget, overacted, painfully earnest explanations of things like hand-washing technique and customer greeting protocols. Gilroy's was no different. During my first week, Patrice had sat me in the break room with a laptop and had me watch about 2 hours of these videos. Standard stuff. The Gilroy's Way, Food Safety Fundamentals, Drive-Thru Excellence. They were exactly as bad as you'd expect, filmed sometime in the mid-2000s based on the hairstyles and the video quality. What happened during my third week was that Victor told me I needed to watch an additional training module. He said it was required for anyone who'd completed their probationary period, which at Gilroy's was apparently 15 shifts. He set up the laptop in the break room, loaded the video, and left. The video was different from the others. It had no title card, no Gilroy's logo, no cheerful narrator. It opened on a shot of a Gilroy's dining room, not ours, but one with the same layout, the same orange and brown tile, the same plate glass windows. The camera was stationary, mounted somewhere near the ceiling, looking down at the empty restaurant. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Just the empty dining room. The lights were on, but the restaurant was clearly closed. Chairs up on the tables. Floor freshly mopped. The wet tile reflecting the fluorescent light. Then a customer walked in. They came in through the front door, which should have been locked if the restaurant was closed. They walked to the counter. No one was behind it. The customer stood there, perfectly still, facing the menu board. They stood there for 1 minute, 2 minutes. I watched the time code on the video. 3 minutes, 45 seconds of a person standing motionless at a counter in an empty restaurant. Then they turned around, walked to a booth, sat down, and placed their hands flat on the table. Palms down, fingers spread. They sat like that, not moving, staring straight ahead for another 2 minutes. Then the video cut to black. It stayed black for about 10 seconds. Then text appeared, white on black, in a plain font. When a customer does not match, do not engage. Complete the transaction. Do not alter your behavior. Do not discuss. Then the video ended. I sat in the break room staring at the laptop screen for a while. The video player had returned to a generic media player interface. No file name visible. No other files in the folder. I found Victor in his office. He was sitting at his desk making notes on a printed schedule. I stood in the doorway until he looked up. "I watched the video," I said. "Good. What was that?" "Training material." "What does not match mean?" Victor set his pen down. He looked at me with that assessing expression, the one that made you feel like you were being measured against a template. Some of the customers who come in, especially late at night, are not typical customers. You may have already noticed this. The video is instructing you on how to handle those interactions. Handle them how? The video just said don't engage and don't change your behavior. That's not handling anything. That's just pretending nothing is happening. "Correct," Victor said. And then he picked up his pen and went back to the schedule. I stood there for another few seconds, waiting for more. He didn't look up again. I went back to the floor. That night, something happened that made the video feel less like corporate nonsense and more like a warning I should have taken seriously. It was about 11:15. The dining room was empty. Megan had gone home at 10, and it was just me, Deshawn, and Victor closing. I was wiping down the front counter when the door opened and a man walked in. He was average height, average build, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. Nothing remarkable. He walked to the counter and stood in front of the register. I put on my customer service face and said, "Hi, welcome to Gilroy's. What can I get you?" His eyes moved to the menu board above and behind me. He studied it. Then he said, "Number 4 combo, medium, with a Coke." Maybe a little flat, but it was late. Lots of people sound flat at 11:15. I rang it up. The total was $8.47. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handful of bills and coins. He separated them with precise, unhurried movements and placed them on the counter. I picked them up and counted. A 5, 3 ones, a quarter, 2 dimes, and 2 pennies. $8.47. Exact change. I looked up at him. He was looking at the counter where the money had been, not at me. His eyes didn't come to my face. "That'll be just a few minutes," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, thin and too bright in the empty restaurant. He nodded and walked to a booth. Not the nearest one. He walked to the booth that was second from the windows, on the left side. He sat down and placed his hands flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread. My skin went cold, not metaphorically. I felt the temperature of my arms and the back of my neck drop, like I'd walked into the freezer. It was the same posture from the video. Exactly the same. The hands flat, the fingers spread, the stillness. He sat there and stared straight ahead at the back of the booth opposite him, and he didn't move. I made his food on autopilot, assembled the burger, dropped the fries, filled the drink. I put it all on a tray and brought it out. I set the tray on his table. He didn't look at me. He didn't acknowledge the food. I went back behind the counter. For the next 15 minutes, I found reasons to stay in the kitchen. I prepped tomorrow's burger patties. I wiped the inside of the fryer housing. I organized the walk-in, which didn't need organizing. When I finally made myself go back to the front, the man was gone. The tray was on the table. The food was eaten. Every bit of it. The wrapper was folded neatly. The fry container was empty. The cup was drained. but the food had been consumed in a way that left the table immaculate. No crumbs, no condensation ring from the cup, no ketchup smears. It looked like someone had carefully simulated the aftermath of a meal. I cleared the tray and wiped the table and tried to slow my breathing. Victor appeared behind me. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. "You did fine," he said. "What was that?" "A customer." "Victor." "You did fine," he said again, and went back to his office. That night, driving home, I tried to rationalize. The exact change could be coincidence. The hand posture could be a habit, or a stretch, or just a weird thing some people do. The way the table looked after, maybe he was just neat. Maybe I was projecting the video onto a perfectly normal late-night customer and turning him into something he wasn't. I almost convinced myself. But then I got home and tried to picture the man's face, and I couldn't. I could see the gray t-shirt, the jeans, the hands on the table, but the face was a blur. Not like a bad memory, like there was nothing there to remember. The next few shifts were normal. Busy enough during rush hours that I didn't have time to think. Slow enough afterward that I had too much time. I watched the late customers. Most of them were fine. The Tuesday-Thursday newspaper man, the shake lady, the teenagers on weekends. Real people with real faces that I could remember and recognize. But 2 or 3 times a shift, sometimes more, one of the others would come in. The exact change people. The ones whose faces wouldn't stick. I did what the video said. I completed the transaction. I didn't alter my behavior. I didn't engage beyond the minimum required customer interaction. And they were fine. They ordered, they paid, they ate, they left. Nothing happened. What bothered me wasn't the customers themselves. It was how quickly I'd adapted to them. Within a week of watching that video, I'd internalized the protocol. See them, serve them, forget them. It became routine. And that scared me more than the customers did. Because routines are how you stop asking questions. I tried to ask Andrea about it. This was maybe my 4th week. We were on a shift together a Wednesday night, and during a lull I said, "Andrea, can I ask you something?" "Depends." "The training video. The one Victor shows you after probation. Did you see it?" She was restocking cups, fitting the paper stacks into the dispenser with practiced efficiency. She didn't stop. "Yeah. And the customers it's about. The ones who don't match. You've seen them. I don't talk about this. I know the video says not to. But I need." "It's not the video." She stopped restocking and looked at me directly. "I don't talk about it because nothing good comes from talking about it. You do the job. You serve whoever comes in. You go home. That's it. I don't want to know. And you don't either. You just think you do." She went back to the cups. After a moment, she said quieter, "Ellis was the one before you. He wanted to know, too. Who's Ellis? He worked here before you. Closed most nights, same as you. He started paying too much attention to them. Watching them. Timing how long they stayed. Writing things down on receipt paper. What happened to him? He quit." "That's it? He quit?" Andrea pressed the last stack of cups into the dispenser and turned to me. Her expression was complicated. Not frightened. Something more like the look a person has when they're deciding how much of the truth someone can handle. "He quit. On a Tuesday. I know because I was supposed to work with him that night. And Patrice called me in the morning to say he wouldn't be in anymore. I texted him. He didn't answer. I called. Disconnected number. I drove to his apartment because we were friendly, and I was worried. His apartment was empty. Not cleaned out. Empty. Like no one had ever lived there. I talked to his landlord. She said the apartment had been vacant for 2 months. That's not possible. No, Andrea agreed. It isn't. She walked back to the kitchen, and we didn't speak about it again. I should have quit. I know that. Looking back, with the clarity that distance gives you, I should have taken off the visor, put it on the counter, and walked out that night. But I didn't. And the reason I didn't is embarrassingly simple. I needed the money. I had rent due in 2 weeks and a car payment after that, and the job market for college dropouts in the Central Valley was not exactly overflowing with options. So I stayed. I told myself I'd keep my head down, do the work, and ignore whatever was happening with the customers who didn't match. That resolution lasted about a week. What broke it wasn't something dramatic. It was something small, the way the worst things usually start. I was on the register, Thursday night, maybe 9:30. A woman came in. Normal woman, middle-aged, tired-looking, wearing scrubs like she'd just come off a hospital shift. She ordered a combo, paid with a debit card, waited for her food. Normal. But as I was handing her the bag, another customer came in behind her. One of them I could tell immediately. The way they moved, the way their eyes tracked the space without landing on any person in it. The woman in scrubs took her bag and turned to leave, and as she turned, she came within about 2 feet of the other customer, who was walking toward the counter. She flinched. It was subtle. Just a slight hitch in her stride, a tightening of her shoulders. She didn't look at the customer. She didn't say anything. But she flinched the way you flinch when you walk through a cold spot in a warm room. When your body registers something your mind hasn't processed yet. She walked out a little faster than she needed to. And through the window, I watched her get in her car and sit there for a moment before starting the engine. She'd felt it too. Whatever was wrong with them, it wasn't just me. Other people could sense it. They just didn't have the framework to understand what they were sensing. That realization changed something. Because if ordinary people could feel it, if there was something physically measurably different about these customers, then it wasn't paranoia. It wasn't late-night weirdness. It was real. And someone at Gilroy's knew what it was, and that training video was proof that this was known, managed, accounted for. I started paying attention to Victor. Not obviously. I didn't follow him around or spy on his office. I just started noting things I'd previously overlooked. Like the fact that Victor never left the restaurant during his shifts. Not once, in the entire time I worked there. He'd arrive before the evening crew and be there when we left. He never stepped outside for air, never walked to his car for something, never took a smoke break. He existed entirely within the walls of the Gilroys from 4 p.m. to close. Like the fact that his office had a second monitor that he kept angled away from the door. Whenever I passed the office and happened to glance in, I could see the glow of it, but never what was on the screen. The visible monitor showed the security camera feeds, 4 quadrants, front counter, drive-thru, kitchen. Parking lot, the hidden monitor showed something else. Like the fact that on the nights when more of the non-matching customers came in, and there were patterns, I was starting to see them, clusters on certain nights, gaps on others. Victor would make more notes. His clipboard would come out, and he'd stand near the office door, watching the dining room, writing things down with small, precise movements. I began to form a theory that I couldn't quite articulate. Not about what the customers were. I didn't have enough information for that. But about what Gilroy's was. The theory went something like this. The restaurant was not primarily a restaurant. It was primarily something else. And the burger selling was either a cover or a side effect, or a necessary condition of whatever the real purpose was. Victor wasn't a manager. He was something else. And the crew, all of us, weren't just employees. We were part of the apparatus, and the training video was the moment when the apparatus acknowledged itself to you. Just enough to ensure you'd behave correctly, not enough to let you understand why. It was during my 6th week that I met the person who confirmed I wasn't wrong. His name was Paul, and he came in on a Friday night around 11. He wasn't one of them. I was sure of that immediately. He made eye contact. He fumbled with his wallet. He ordered, with the normal human hesitations, the and actually make that a large, and the slightly embarrassed smile when he couldn't find his loyalty card. He paid with a credit card, and the total was $9.12, and nobody anywhere had exact change for that. He sat in a booth with his food and ate it like a person, messy, distracted, scrolling his phone between bites. I was cleaning the dining room, and as I wiped down the table next to his, he looked up at me and said, "You're new here, right?" "Couple months," I said. "You like it? It's a job." He nodded. He had a look about him that I'd learned to associate with a specific kind of person, someone carrying information they're not sure they should share. An internal negotiation happening behind the eyes. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And it's going to sound strange." "Sure. The people who come in late, the quiet ones, have you noticed anything about them?" I stopped wiping the table. I looked at him. He looked back. Real eye contact. Real face. The face of a man in his 30s with a receding hairline and tired eyes and a day's worth of stubble. Completely, unmistakably human. "Yeah," I said. "I have." He breathed out. "Okay, can you sit down for a second?" I glanced back at the counter. Deshaun was on the headset, dealing with a drive-thru order. Victor was in his office. I sat down across from Paul. "I used to work at a Gilroy's," he said. "Different location. Out in Modesto. 4 years ago. I worked there for about 5 months, and I saw the same things you're seeing. The exact change. The faces you can't remember. All of it. The video, too. The bullshit non-answers from management. What are they?" Paul picked up a fry and looked at it and put it back down. "I don't know what they are. I need to be honest about that. But I can tell you what I learned, which might be worse than knowing what they are. Because what I learned is about us. About the people who work at Gilroy's." "What do you mean?" "After I quit, and I quit the normal way, gave 2 weeks' notice, nothing dramatic, I started looking into the company. Gilroy's Burger. I looked up their corporate registration, their franchise agreements, their history, and what I found was that Gilroy's doesn't really exist. Not the way a normal company exists. What does that mean? It means the corporate entity that owns Gilroy's is a subsidiary of a holding company that's registered to a PO, box in Delaware. The holding company is owned by another holding company. That one is owned by a trust. The trust doesn't have any named beneficiaries that I could find. There are no public records of a founder, no press coverage, no brand history beyond the bare minimum you'd need to operate a chain. Gilroy's has been running for over 30 years, and no one has ever profiled it, reviewed it, investigated it, or questioned it. 40 locations in 2 states, and it's invisible. Lots of small chains are under the radar. Under the radar, sure, but this isn't under the radar. This is an absence, like someone specifically designed the company to not be noticed, to exist just enough to function and not 1 degree more. I wanted to dismiss this conspiracy thinking, paranoid pattern matching. But I'd seen the customers. I'd seen the video. I'd heard what Andreas said about Ellis. What do you think the restaurants are for? I asked. Paul leaned forward slightly. I think they're collection points. I think the non-matching customers come to Gilroy's locations because that's what the locations are designed for. I think the restaurants are built at specific sites, and the hours of operation, and the menu, and the staffing, and all of it are configured to attract, or maybe to generate, whatever those customers are. And I think the employees are part of the mechanism, not because we do anything special, because we're normal, because our presence, our normal human behavior, is somehow part of what makes the process whir. What process? I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out for 4 years. Why come here? Why come to this location? Because I've been to 9 Gilroy's locations in the past 4 years, and this one has the highest late-night foot traffic of any of them. Something about this site. Maybe the location. Maybe the building. Maybe something I can't see. But more of them come here than anywhere else. Your break ended 10 minutes ago. I hadn't heard him approach. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. I stood up, muttered an apology, and went back to the counter. When I looked back at Paul's booth a few minutes later, he was gone. His tray was on the table. His food was half eaten. A normal human mess. Under the tray, folded into a small square, was a piece of receipt paper with a phone number on it. I put it in my pocket. The next 3 shifts were the most normal I'd had in weeks. The non-matching customers came in at their usual rate. 2, 3, 4 per shift, but nothing unusual happened. They ordered, paid, ate, left. Victor watched from his office door. The crew worked. The burgers got made. Everything was fine. I called Paul on my day off. He picked up on the second ring. I was hoping you'd call, he said, but not on your phone. Buy a prepaid. Call me from that. Why? Because I've had 2 phones die on me in the past 4 years, and both times it was right after I made a call from inside or near a Gilroy's. Not broken. Dead. Factory reset dead. I'm probably paranoid. But buy a prepaid anyway. I bought a prepaid phone from a gas station the next day. I called Paul from the parking lot of my apartment complex, which was about 4 miles from the Gilroys on Delmore Avenue. He answered and said, "Better." Okay. How much do you want to know? Everything. There is no everything. There's just what I've pieced together. And some of it is going to sound unhinged, and I need you to sit with it before you decide I'm crazy. Go ahead. The non-matching customers. I call them that because that's what the training video calls them, and I don't have a better word. I've observed them across 9 locations over 4 years. I've logged over 300 individual sightings. Here's what I can tell you for certain. They always pay with exact change. Always. This isn't a preference. I believe they are incapable of handling a transaction that produces change. I tested this once at the Modesto location. By deliberately misquoting a total, I told one of them the price was 50 cents more than it actually was. The customer stood at the counter for 90 seconds without moving. Then he put down the exact correct amount, the real amount, not the one I'd said, and walked away. He knew the real price. The misquote didn't confuse him. It just broke the sequence. Temporarily. You've seen this. The food is consumed, but the process is performative. I sat in a Gilroy's in Turlock for 3 hours one night and watched one of them eat a burger. He picked it up, brought it to his mouth, bit, chewed, swallowed, mechanically perfect. But here's the thing. I watched the burger. The volume of the burger did not decrease at the rate it should have given the size of the bites he was taking. He ate the entire burger in what should have been about 8 bites, but I counted 19. And each bite was the same size. And the burger was the same size after each bite until it was suddenly gone. Between bite 18 and bite 19, the burger went from full to nothing. I know how it sounds. The last thing, their faces. You've noticed you can't remember them. I've tried to photograph them, twice. Both times the photo was on my phone when I took it. Both times it was gone within an hour. Not deleted, gone. Like it had never been taken. No entry in the recently deleted folder. No metadata. The storage space it should have occupied was just empty. I was sitting in my car with the prepaid phone pressed to my ear, and I was thinking about Ellis, the person before me, the apartment that had been vacant for 2 months, the disconnected phone number, the absence. Paul, I said, a guy who worked at my location before me. His name was Ellis. He started investigating them, the way you are. And then he was gone. Not just quit. Gone. His apartment was empty. His phone was disconnected. People acted like he'd never been there. The line was quiet for a long time. Yeah, Paul said finally. That happens. What do you mean that happens? I've talked to people at other locations. Not many. Most employees don't notice. Or they notice and they follow the video's instructions, and they don't think about it. But a few, over the years, a few notice and can't stop noticing. And of those, some of them go further. They start documenting, investigating, pushing. Not all of them. Some just move away, quit, seem fine. But some of them disappear the way you're describing. Thoroughly. As if they were edited out. Edited out of what? Out of everything. Records. Memories. The physical spaces they occupied. I talked to a woman in Reno who worked at a Gilroy's there, and she told me about a coworker who'd gotten too curious. She went to his Facebook page after he disappeared. His profile existed, but every photo that should have shown his face was corrupted. Little gray squares where his face should have been. And then the whole profile was gone a day later. I felt something then that I want to describe accurately, because it matters. It wasn't fear, exactly. Fear is when you see the thing that might hurt you. This was more like the sensation of realizing that the ground you're standing on isn't ground. That the thing you've been treating as solid and stable and real is actually a surface stretched over something else. And the surface is thinner than you thought. And what's beneath it is not something you were designed to perceive. Why haven't you disappeared? I asked. I think because I don't work at one anymore. And because I'm careful. I never go inside. I observe from outside, from my car, across the parking lot. I never interact with them directly. I think, and this is just a theory, I think the process requires proximity, physical presence inside the building. The restaurant is the space where whatever they are does whatever it does, and if you're not inside that space, you're outside its reach. Yes. And the more I notice them, the more danger I'm in. I think so. Yes. Then why did you come inside the restaurant to talk to me? Another long pause. Because I needed to see if you were still you. What does that mean, Ellis? The woman's coworker in Reno. The others. Before they disappeared, people who knew them said they seemed less, quieter. Like they were losing resolution. I needed to see you in person to make sure you still had your full resolution. And? You're fine. You're sharp. You're scared and confused, and that's good. Because scared and confused means you're still processing this like a human being. The people who are about to disappear stop being scared. They stop being confused. They just even out. I thought about Victor. His flat voice, his precise notes, his joyless efficiency. The way he existed entirely within the walls of the restaurant and never seemed to want or need anything beyond it. Paul, Victor, our night manager. What about him? He's been there 3 years. He never leaves the building during shifts. He watches everyone. He shows the training video. He manages the whole situation with the non-matching customers. And he's flat. He's so flat. How flat? Like he doesn't have a life outside the restaurant. Like there's nothing behind his eyes except the restaurant. Paul was quiet again. Then he said, I need you to do something. Tomorrow, before your shift, go to the county assessor's office, or look it up online. Find the property record for the Gilroy's building on Delmore Avenue. Look at the date it was built. Then look at Victor's employee file if you can get access to it. Look at his start date. Why? Because at 3 of the 9 locations I've looked into, the longest tenured employee's start date matches the building's construction date, not the opening date of the restaurant, the construction date, the date the building was physically erected. I didn't understand what he meant by that. I said so. I think Victor might be part of the building, Paul said. I think some of them were the first ones through the door when the building was complete, and they never left. And over time, they became the person whose job it is to keep the process running. I think they start out like you and me, and then they stop. The call ended shortly after that. Paul told me he'd be in the area for another week and to call if I needed to. I sat in my car for a long time. The next day, I looked up the property records for 4815 Delmore Avenue. The building had been constructed in 1994. The restaurant had opened in 1995. The contractor was listed as Gilroy's Properties, LLC. Not a construction company, but the same corporate entity that owned the restaurants. I couldn't access Victor's employee file. That was kept in the office, in a filing cabinet that was always locked. But I asked Patrice, casually, how long Victor had been with the company. She said, "Oh, Victor's been with Gilroy's since the beginning. He was part of the opening crew for this location." When was that? 95, I think? Maybe 94? He's a lifer. 31 years. Victor had been working at this Gilroy's for 31 years, in a job where average tenure was measured in weeks. I called Paul that night and told him. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded tired. "It fits," he said. "Listen, I need to tell you something I should have told you the first night we talked. The reason I'm really here. The reason I've been doing this for 4 years. Okay, my sister worked at a Gilroy's, the one in Turlock. She worked there for 7 months. She started noticing the customers. She started asking questions. And then she was gone. Not dead. I checked. No death record. No obituary. No body. Just gone. Her apartment was cleaned out. Her phone was disconnected. Her friends, our mutual friends, people who'd known her for years. When I asked them about her, they looked at me like I was speaking a language they didn't understand. They knew who I was. They knew I had a sister. But they couldn't tell me her name. They couldn't describe her face. She'd been edited out of their memories, incompletely, like a bad erasure that left smudges. Paul, I still remember her. That's what keeps me going. I still remember her face. Her name was Carly. She was 26 years old, and she had a gap between her front teeth, and she laughed too loud in movie theaters, and she once ate an entire sleeve of Oreos during a road trip and threw up in Bakersfield. I remember all of it, and I need to figure out why she was taken and where she went, because the alternative is accepting that she simply stopped existing, and I won't do that. His voice had changed, not broken, exactly, but compressed, like a structure bearing more weight than it was designed for. What can I do? I said. I need you to check something inside the restaurant. Something I can't check from the outside. There's a part of every Gilroy's that I've never been able to see from the parking lot, and I think it's where the answer is. What part? The basement. Gilroy's doesn't have a basement. Every Gilroy's has a basement. They're just not accessible from the main floor. The entrance is in the walk-in freezer. There's a panel on the floor, under the wire shelving on the left side. It looks like a drain cover, but it's not. It's a hatch. I thought about the walk-in freezer. I'd been in it hundreds of times. I'd never looked at the floor that carefully. It was just a floor. Concrete slightly textured for grip, with the wire shelving units against the walls and the stacks of frozen patties and bags of fries and tubs of ice cream. How do you know this? I asked. Because at the Modesto location, I found it. I was still working there at the time. I opened it. There are stairs. Did you go down? I opened the hatch, and I looked down and I saw stairs going down into the dark. And I could hear something. Not a sound, exactly. More like the negative of a sound. The way your ears feel in a room that's been soundproofed. That pressurized silence. It was coming from down there. And I closed the hatch, and I quit the next day. And you want me to go down there. I want you to look. I'm not asking you to go down the stairs. I'm asking you to open the hatch and look and tell me what you see. Because I think if I can understand what's down there, I can understand what happened to Carly. I went to the left side. The wire shelving units were bolted to the wall, but the bottom shelf was high enough that I could see the floor beneath it. I crouched down and looked. There was a metal panel, round about 2 feet in diameter, set flush with the concrete. It looked exactly like a drain cover. It even had the small perforations that drain covers have, the circular holes meant to let water through. But when I touched it, it wasn't bolted down. It lifted freely. It was just sitting there, held in place by nothing but its own weight. I lifted it and set it aside. Underneath was not a drain. It was a circular opening in the concrete, and below it, metal stairs spiraling down into darkness. The stairs were narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, with a thin railing on one side. They were made of the same kind of metal as the shelving, industrial wire, galvanized, slightly rusty. Paul was right about the sound. Or the non-sound. The absence. Looking down into that opening, I could feel it. A pressure in my ears, like descending in an airplane, like the air below was denser than the air above, and beneath the pressure, something else. A vibration that I felt in my chest more than heard. Low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, if a building could have a heartbeat. The stairs disappeared into the dark after about 1 full spiral. I couldn't see the bottom. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight and pointed it down. The light reached maybe 20 feet before the stairway curved away and I lost sight of it. The walls of the shaft were concrete, smooth, the same as the freezer floor. No markings, no fixtures, nothing. I was supposed to just look. That was the deal. Open the hatch, look, close it, report back to Paul. But I could feel something coming up from below. Not the vibration. That was constant. This was different. This was warmth. In a freezer set to 0 degrees, the air rising from that opening was warm. Not hot. Body temperature. Like breath. And carried on that warm air, a smell. Faint. Familiar? It took me a moment to place it. It smelled like the restaurant. Not the freezer. The restaurant. The fryer oil. The grill char. The specific combination of scents that hit you when you walked in the front door. But underneath those familiar smells, something else. Something organic. Something that reminded me of the way a hospital smells when you get past the antiseptic. The fundamental, biological smell of bodies in a closed space. I was leaning over the opening, and the warm air was rising around my face. And I was trying to make sense of the smell when I heard Victor's voice directly behind me. Close that. I spun around. He was standing in the freezer doorway. His face was expressionless. His eyes were fixed on the opening in the floor. Not on me. On the opening. Close that right now. I stood up and moved back from the hatch. Victor, what's down there? His voice was the same flat tone it always was. But there was something underneath it. A frequency I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Not fear. Something mechanical. Like a recording being played at the wrong speed. I picked up the metal cover and placed it back over the opening. The warm air cut off immediately. The vibration in my chest faded. Victor looked at me, directly at me. And for the first time in the 2 months I'd worked with him, I felt like I was seeing something real behind his eyes. Not emotion. Not personality. Something else. Something that recognized me, specifically me, and was calculating what to do about it. Go home, he said. My shift isn't, I will close. I went. I grabbed my things from the break room, told Deshawn I wasn't feeling well, and left through the back door. In the parking lot, I pulled out my prepaid phone and called Paul. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I drove home. I called Paul 3 more times that night. No answer. The next morning I tried again. The number was disconnected. I sat on my bed with the dead phone pressed to my ear, listening to the carrier message telling me the number was no longer in service. And I thought about Carly. I thought about Ellis. I thought about the way people disappeared from this story. Thoroughly. Completely. As if they'd been not just removed, but subtracted. Taken out of the equation so cleanly that the equation rebalanced itself around the absence and carried on as if nothing was missing. I went to work that afternoon. I didn't know what else to do. I kept telling myself that Paul had just changed his number, that he was being careful, that he'd find another way to contact me. I put on my visor and clocked in and took my position at the register. Patrice was there, which was unusual. She normally left before the evening crew arrived. She was in the office with Victor. The door was closed. I could hear their voices but not their words. After about 10 minutes, she came out and walked past me without making eye contact and left through the front door. Victor came out of the office and stood in his usual spot near the door, clipboard in hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked. First time he'd ever asked me anything personal. "Fine. Good. Normal shift tonight. Victor, what I saw last night in the freezer. There is nothing in the freezer. You checked inventory. The inventory was correct. That was the last task before close. He said it without emphasis, without inflection. As a statement of fact, so plain that for a moment I almost believed it. Almost accepted that I'd gone into the freezer, checked inventory, and come out. That there had been no hatch, no stairs, no warm air, no vibration. That it had been a normal end to a normal shift. Right, I said. The inventory was correct. Good. He went back to his office. Something had changed. Not in the restaurant. The restaurant was exactly the same. Not in Victor. Victor was exactly the same. The change was in me. Or rather, the change was in the way the restaurant related to me. I can't explain this well. It's like the difference between being a guest in someone's house and being a part of the house. When you're a guest, you move through the space and the space accommodates you. When you're part of the house, you move through the space and the space moves with you. You stop feeling the edges. You stop noticing the temperature. The hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards become so integrated into your perception that they're not sounds anymore. They're the absence of silence. That's what started happening to me at Gilroy's. The sounds of the restaurant, the fryer, the grill, the drive-thru headset, the door chime, the ice machine, stopped being sounds. They became the texture of my thinking. I'd be standing at the register, and I wouldn't hear the fryer because the fryer was the background frequency of my thoughts. I'd be in the walk-in, and I wouldn't feel the cold because the cold was the temperature of my attention. I noticed it happening, and I fought it. I'd deliberately focus on a sound, the beep of the fryer timer, and force myself to hear it as a sound, as something external, something that wasn't me. And for a few seconds, I could. And then it would slip back, and the beep would integrate, and I'd be part of the restaurant again. Andrea noticed. About a week after the freezer incident, during a shift together, she looked at me across the kitchen and said, "Hey, what? What about it? You're doing it. The evening out thing." I looked at my reflection in the metal hood above the grill. I looked the same as always. Same face, same features. "I look fine," I said. "No, you look the same. That's the problem. You look exactly the same as you did an hour ago, and an hour before that. People's faces change. They react. They shift. Yours has stopped." I tried to frown. I tried to look concerned. I watched my reflection in the metal hood, and I could see the expression form on my face. But Andrea was right. It felt performative. Like I was selecting an expression from a menu rather than feeling it arise naturally. "Since when?" I said. "Since last week. Since whatever happened in the freezer that nobody's talking about." "You know about that?" Victor told Patrice. Patrice told me. Not details, just that something happened and to keep an eye on you. "Keep an eye on me for what?" Andrea turned away from me and started assembling a burger. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of 11 months of practice. She didn't look at me when she spoke. For the evening out, that's how it starts. You become smooth, consistent. Your voice stops changing pitch. Your face stops changing expression. You stop making small talk. You stop having preferences. You become efficient. You become excellent at the job. And then one day you don't leave. "You mean I won't want to leave?" "I mean you won't leave. You'll close the restaurant, and instead of walking out to your car, you'll just stay. You'll be there when the opening crew comes in the morning, and you'll be there the next night. and the next. And eventually nobody will remember that you ever weren't there. You'll become Victor, Andrea. I've seen it. Not here. Before. I worked at another Gilroy's. In Fresno. Before I transferred here. There was a woman there named Diane. She was a shift lead, same as me. She started evening out. I watched it happen over about 3 weeks. And then, one morning I came in for the opening shift, and Diane was behind the counter in the same clothes she'd been wearing the night before. And she looked at me. And I looked at her, and her face was, it was like a photograph of a face. All the details were correct, but nothing was moving. Nothing was alive. What happened to her? She's still there. She's the night manager at the Fresno Gilroy's. She's been there for 9 years. I made it through the rest of that shift. I don't remember most of it. I was focused on monitoring myself, testing myself. I'd pinch the back of my hand to see if I felt pain. I did. I'd think about my mother who lived in Oregon and see if I could summon the feeling of missing her. I could, but it was thin, like a photocopy of an emotion rather than the original. After work, I drove to the gas station where I'd bought the prepaid phone. I bought another one. I drove to the parking lot of a grocery store 3 miles from the restaurant and sat in my car and tried to think clearly. The facts, as I understood them, Gilroy's was not a normal restaurant chain. It served a purpose I didn't fully understand, related to the non-matching customers and whatever was in the basement. Employees who became too aware of the truth were at risk of being edited out, erased from records, memories, and reality. Alternatively, employees who stayed too long and noticed too much were at risk of something different and possibly worse, being integrated, becoming part of the restaurant, losing their variability, their humanity, their ability to exist outside the building, becoming Victor, becoming Diane. The process was accelerated by proximity to whatever was below the restaurant, which I had gotten close to when I opened the hatch. I was beginning to even out. My face, my voice, my emotions, they were flattening. The restaurant was assimilating me. I had 2 options: leave now, quit, walk away, put as much distance between myself and Gilroy's as possible, and hope that whatever was happening to me was reversible. Or go back, go down those stairs. Understand what was below the restaurant, what the process actually was, what had happened to Carly and Ellis, and all the others who'd been subtracted from the world. I chose neither. What I did instead was something I hadn't planned, something that arose from a part of my mind that was still mine, still unpredictable, still capable of making a choice that wasn't on the menu. I drove to the Gilroy's in Fresno. It was 2.5 hours south. I got there at 4 a.m. The restaurant was closed, dark, the parking lot empty. But not entirely empty. There was a single car in the lot parked near the back door. And through the plate glass windows, in the dim glow of the emergency lighting, I could see a figure standing behind the counter. Diane. It had to be Diane. Standing motionless behind the counter of a closed restaurant at 4 a.m, alone, in the dark. I sat in my car and watched. She didn't move. For 20 minutes, she stood in exactly the same position, facing the dining room, hands at her sides. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked directly at my car. She couldn't have seen me. The parking lot was dark. My headlights were off, and the distance between the window and my car was at least 50 yards. But she looked right at me. And then she raised one hand and placed it flat against the window. Palm out, fingers spread. The same gesture. Always the same gesture. The hands flat, the fingers spread. Whatever it meant, whatever it signified, it was the signature of the process, the mark of the system. I started my car and left. On the drive back, I did something that probably saved me. I called my mother. It was 6 in the morning, which meant 7 in Oregon. And she picked up on the third ring with that groggy, slightly worried hello that mothers give when their child calls at an unusual hour. "Mom," I said, "it's me. Honey, are you okay?" "I'm okay. I wanted to hear your voice." We talked for an hour. She told me about her garden. She told me about the neighbor's dog that kept getting into the yard. She told me about a recipe she'd tried that hadn't turned out right and how she was going to attempt it again this weekend, with different proportions. She asked me about my job, and I said it was fine. She asked if I was eating enough, and I said yes. She told me she loved me, and I said I loved her too. And when I said it, I meant it, not a photocopy. The original. Engaging with the messy, mundane, imperfect details of another person's life. It was like a hand reaching into the smooth, flat water I was sinking into and pulling me up by the collar. I could feel my face again. Not the restaurant's version of my face, the consistent, unmoving mask. My actual face, with all its involuntary micro-expressions and asymmetries and flaws. I cried. Sitting in my car on the shoulder of Highway 99, I cried for about 10 minutes. And the crying felt real and raw and ugly. And it was the most human I'd felt in weeks. I decided to quit. Not dramatically, not with investigation or confrontation. Just quit. Walk away. Do what the sane part of me had been screaming to do since the night I saw the training video. But I needed to do one thing first. I went to work that evening. Normal shift, I put on the visor, clocked in, took my position. Deshaun was on grill. Megan was on drive-thru. Victor was in his office. I was on register. I waited until 9:30 when the dining room was down to 2 tables and the kitchen was running on autopilot. Then I went to the break room. The laptop was on the table, plugged in, same as always. I opened it. The desktop was generic, a default wallpaper, a few folders. I found the folder that contained the training videos. There were the ones I'd watched during my first week. Food safety, customer service, drive-through procedures. And there was another file. No name, just a string of numbers for a file name. It was the video Victor had shown me. The one with the empty restaurant and the non-matching customer. But now there was a second file beneath it. Same format. Different number string. One I hadn't seen before. I opened it. The video showed the same Gilroy's dining room. Same angle, same ceiling-mounted camera. But this time, the restaurant wasn't empty. It was full. Every booth was occupied. Every table. And the people sitting in them they were still. All of them. Sitting upright, hands flat on the tables, palms down, fingers spread. Dozens of them. The dining room was packed with motionless figures, all in the same posture, all staring straight ahead. The camera held on this image for about 30 seconds. Then, slowly, the angle shifted. The camera tilted down, and I realized it wasn't a ceiling-mounted camera at all. It was a handheld camera, held by someone standing at the counter, and they were turning, panning across the dining room, showing each face. The faces were blank. Not empty, blank, like a face that had been carefully sanded smooth. All the features present, but all the individuality removed. Eyes that were the right shape, but the wrong depth. Mouths that were closed in a way that suggested they had never been open. Noses, cheekbones, jawlines that were all correct, but all the same, as if every face had been generated from the same base template, with only the slightest variations. The camera continued panning, past the dining room, through the kitchen, to the walk-in freezer. The door was open. Inside, the hatch was open. The camera descended, the spiral, the concrete shaft. The camera wobbled with each step, the flashlight mounted on its swinging shadows across the walls. Down and down and down, more stairs than seemed possible, more depth than a building's foundation should allow. And then the stairs ended, and the camera emerged into a space. I don't have the right words for what I saw. I've thought about this for years, and I still don't have the right words. The space was large, much larger than the restaurant above. The ceiling was high, 20, 30 feet, and it was made of the same concrete as the shaft. The floor was smooth and warm-looking, lit by a source I couldn't identify, a diffuse amber glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. And the space was full, not of people, not of machines, of something that was both and neither. Shapes that were upright and human-scaled but wrong in every proportion, too smooth, too symmetric. They were standing in rows, hundreds of them, arranged in a grid pattern that extended beyond what the camera's light could reach. They weren't moving. They weren't breathing. But they were present in a way that living things are present. They displaced the air around them. They cast shadows. They had mass and volume and reality. They looked like the customers, the non-matching customers, the exact change people with the forgettable faces. They looked like a warehouse full of them, standing, waiting, ready. The camera held on this image for a long time. I could hear the person holding it breathing. Fast, shallow breaths, the breathing of someone who is very afraid and trying to control it. Then the camera turned to the left, and in the corner of the space, against the wall, there was something different. A chair. A simple metal folding chair. And in the chair, a person. Not one of the shapes. A person, sitting slumped, head down, motionless but recognizably human in a way the shapes were not. They were wearing a Gilroy's polo. The image was too dark to make out their face. Then text appeared on screen, the same white on black as the first video. Integration complete. Unit will be reassigned. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. Not the steady, controlled tremor of fear, but the chaotic, sloppy shaking of a body that has been overloaded with information it cannot process. The person in the chair, wearing the Gilroy's polo, slumped, integrated, Ellis, or Carly, or any of the others who'd pushed too far, asked too many questions, opened too many hatches. They hadn't been erased. They'd been moved, taken below, put through whatever process produced the shapes, the non-matching customers. The things that walked into the restaurant every night and paid exact change and ate food that didn't diminish and whose faces dissolved from memory like they'd never been there. The restaurant wasn't making burgers. The restaurant was making them. The non-matching customers came from below, walked through the restaurant, performed the rituals of eating and paying and leaving, and then, what? Went out into the world? Took their places in the grid of everyday life? Became the people you pass on the street and never quite look at, the ones who were present but somehow not there, and the employees who noticed, who pushed, who couldn't stop asking questions, they became raw material. fed back into the system. Integrated. I stood up from the break room table and walked out to the kitchen. Deshawn was cleaning the grill. Megan had already left. The dining room was empty. Victor was standing in his usual spot by the office door. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. The consistency of his face, the even tone of his voice, the way he stood, balanced, centered, hands at his sides, with the same relaxed precision as the shapes in the video. Victor had been here since 1995, 31 years. He hadn't been integrating into the building. He'd been integrated a long time ago. What was standing by the office door, holding a clipboard, watching me with those measuring eyes, was not a person. Not anymore. It was an output, a finished product, something that had been made in the space below and placed in the restaurant to ensure the process continued. "I'm quitting," I said. Victor tilted his head slightly. A bird-like movement, precise, effective when. Now. Effective now. You have a shift tomorrow. "I don't care." He looked at me for a long time. That same calculating expression. Then he nodded once. "Leave the visor on the counter." I took off the visor. I placed it on the counter. I walked past Victor, through the kitchen, out the back door, into the parking lot. The night air hit me like a wall of sensation. Warm, dusty, smelling of asphalt and exhaust, and the faint sweetness of the drainage ditch. Real smells. Outdoor smells. Smells that belong to the world and not to the building. I got in my car and drove. Not home. Not right away. I drove to the gas station and bought a 6-pack of cheap beer and drove to the park on the west side of town and sat on the hood of my car and drank. 2 of them fast and felt the alcohol. Opened something in my chest that had been clenching for weeks. I called my mother again. She answered, even though it was late. I told her I'd quit my job. She said that was probably fine, that there were other jobs, that I could always come stay with her for a while if I needed to figure things out. I told her I loved her. She told me to get some sleep. I slept in my car that night. Not because I was afraid to go home, but because I wanted to be outside. I wanted to feel the air and hear the sounds of the street, and exist in a space that wasn't enclosed, wasn't monitored, wasn't part of the system. In the morning, I went home, packed a bag, and drove to Oregon. I'm telling you this from my mother's house. 3 years later. I work at a hardware store in Corvallis. I live in a small apartment that I pay for with my own money from a job that has nothing to do with food service. I have not been inside a Gilroy's since the night I quit. But here's what I need to tell you. The part that makes this more than just a strange story about a strange job. About 6 months after I left, I was in the grocery store in Corvallis, buying milk and bread and the regular things you buy at a grocery store. I was in the checkout line, and the person in front of me was buying a few items. Nothing unusual, I wasn't paying attention. Then they paid. Exact change. To the penny. I watched them count it out. Bills and coins, separated with precise, unhurried movements, placed on the counter in a neat row. The cashier took the money, said thank you, and the person picked up their bag and left. I watched them walk to the parking lot. I watched their face in the reflection of the automatic doors as they went through. The face slid away from my memory even as I was looking at it. They're not just in Gilroy's. In the weeks after that, I started noticing. At the grocery store, at the gas station, at the hardware store where I work, at the coffee shop downtown, everywhere. Not constantly, Not overwhelming numbers, but a few, here and there. People who paid exact change. People whose faces wouldn't stick. People who moved through the world with that mechanical precision, performing the rituals of daily life. Buying groceries, pumping gas, ordering coffee, with technical correctness and no apparent interiority. They're everywhere. They've always been everywhere. Gilroy's isn't the only source. Gilroy's is just one node in something much larger. The restaurants are just the places where I happen to notice them, because the restaurants are where the veil is thinnest, where the process is most visible, where someone like me could see behind the performance. But the performance is happening everywhere, in every store, and every office, and every sidewalk, and every bus. They're here. They're among us. They have been for a long time. And the system that makes them, whatever it is, wherever it originates, doesn't need us to understand it. It just needs us to not notice. I notice now. Every day. The cashier at the gas station who gives me the same greeting in the same tone every time. The man who walks past the hardware store at exactly 4:15 every afternoon. The woman who sits in the same seat at the coffee shop and reads the same newspaper and orders the same drink and pays exact change, and whose face I cannot remember 5 minutes after she leaves. I notice, and I don't do anything about it. I don't investigate. I don't document. I don't ask questions, because I know what happens to people who push. They get subtracted, edited out. Or worse, integrated. Taken below and made into something smooth and consistent and featureless and sent back up to perform the rituals in some other town, some other store, some other life that isn't really a life at all. I just live. I go to work. I call my mother. I do the small, messy, imperfect things that humans do, and I hold on to them because I think that's the only defense. The things they can't replicate, the inconsistency, the error, the stumble, the way a real person fumbles for exact change and comes up 3 cents short and says, "Sorry, let me check my other pocket." The way a real face shifts and twitches and can't hold one expression for more than a few seconds. The way real people forget things and get confused and tell the same story twice and laugh at the wrong moment and cry when nothing is wrong. Those are the things that prove you're still here, that you haven't been smoothed out, that you haven't been replaced. I hold on to them every day, and every day it gets a little harder to tell the difference. There's one more thing, one thing I've never told anyone, and I'm telling you now because I think someone should know, and because I think the fact that I can still feel afraid of it means I'm still real. Last month, I was at the hardware store. End of my shift. I was cashing out my register, counting the drawer the way I do every night. And as I was counting the coins, sorting the quarters from the dimes, from the nickels, from the pennies, I realized that my total was exact. Not close to exact. Not a few cents off. Exact. Down to the penny, my drawer balanced perfectly with the day's receipts. That had never happened before. In 3 years of working there, my drawer had always been off by a small amount. A few cents over. A few cents under. The normal variance of a human being handling money all day. Small errors. Acceptable discrepancies. The mess of being alive. But that night, the number was perfect. I stood there, looking at the coins in my palm, and I thought about Victor. I thought about Diane. I thought about the shapes standing in rows in the amber light below the restaurant. I thought about the training video's text on the black screen. Integration complete. And I put 6 cents from my own pocket into the drawer so the total would be wrong. I do that every night now. I make sure the number is wrong. I make sure there's an error. I introduce imperfection deliberately, consciously, as an act of will, because I think accuracy is the first thing you lose, not the big things. Your name, your face, your memories. Those come later. The first thing you lose is the ability to be wrong, the capacity for error, the beautiful, human, irreplaceable gift of getting it slightly, trivially, meaninglessly wrong. If you're still getting things wrong, you're still you. Hold on to that.